Okay, everybody, we are on to the fallacies. And a lot of you, let me get this going. A lot of you may have studied some of these perhaps in an English class, right? But these, we've looked a lot at so far basic concepts and the difference between deduction and induction. And we did all the, formal fallacies and like affirming the consequent and denying the antecedent, things that happen in deductive arguments. And then we looked at, how you evaluate analogies and necessary and sufficient conditions. So we're on to more commonplace problems in reasoning that occur mostly in inductive arguments. Okay, and this is sections 3.1 and 3.2 from the book. And so this is more kind of everyday sorts of problems that we hear and that occur in our conversations and in advertising and everywhere we look. So I think that this section or this chapter might be more intuitive to many of you. So just to kick it off, like I said earlier, a formal fallacy is one that can be recognized by merely inspecting the argument's form. Like I said, affirming the consequent, denying the antecedent, for instance. You just have to look at the form of the argument to tell there's something wrong. But an informal fallacy, which is what we're focusing on, that's a defect in an argument that arises from either a mistaken reasoning or the creation of an illusion that makes a bad argument appear good. Detecting these requires an inspection of language, not just the form of the argument. So in his book, his work, De Sophisticus Elenchus, Aristotle identified 13 informal fallacies, and we're going to study more than that. So that's how far back their recognition goes. So the first group is 3.2, and they're known as fallacies of relevance. So fallacies of relevance occur when irrelevant premises are offered in support of a conclusion. Arguments that use irrelevant premises in support of a conclusion suffer from serious flaws in reasoning. Many irrelevant premises rely on psychological or emotional appeal for their persuasive force. So the idea is that whatever premise or premises are offered in support of whatever conclusion, they're psychologically relevant, they're emotionally relevant, but they're logically irrelevant, right? So they may do the trick, they may get you to accept the conclusion or believe the conclusion or do something, feel something, buy something. But from a logical perspective, they're irrelevant to the conclusion. So the first one is known as appeal to force. And when you see these, the Latin in parentheses, that means that it's a fallacy that still sometimes uses the Latin term. We're just going to use the English for the most part. And when you see it in Latin, it means it's one that Aristotle had noticed, way back in like 330 BC and written about. So appeal to force is a threat of harmful consequences that are used to force acceptance of a course of action or a belief that may otherwise be acceptable. So they're basically threats. They can be physical or psychological, sometimes known as scare tactics. Right? So the way that these PowerPoints and lectures are going to go is that I'll define the fallacy and then give you some textbook examples. And textbook examples are intended not to seem super realistic, but they're intended to show you clearly the wrongfulness of the reasoning. Okay, and then followed by these textbook style examples, I'll show some images from advertising that help to drive home, the flavor of the fallacy. So, you should agree to paint my house. Well, how come? You surely wouldn't want to be beaten with a stick. Now, in all fairness, the reason I said beaten with a stick is because, let me go back, argumentum ad baculum means appeal to the stick. Like, that's exactly it. Do this or believe that, or I'm going to beat you with a stick. A baculum being a stick. So, you should agree to paint my house. Why? Well, otherwise I'm going to beat you with a stick or something else, right? Force. Appeal to force. Irrelevant. So when you get in that jury room, you're going to vote not guilty, right? That way your wife and children will stay nice and safe. So the conclusion, or what you're trying to get somebody to do, is vote not guilty. You're threatening a juror. Well, why should I vote not guilty? I think the person's guilty. Because otherwise we'll harm your children and wife. Or you better not marry that man. Well, why, Mom? I really want to. Well, if you do, we'll take you out of the will. So that's a force, that's a threat, scare tactic. Okay? Again, all these fallacies of relevance, they work on people, and they work well because they have psychological or emotional appeal. But from a logical perspective, the premises offered for these conclusions are irrelevant. And that'll be the same with all of the fallacies we look at in this section. So this is an appeal to force from David Siegel. And I don't know if you've ever seen the documentary called The Queen of Versailles. It's excellent. You should if you haven't. But David Siegel, some backstory. David Siegel is or was the CEO of Westgate Resorts, and that's a time-sharing company. And in 2008, prior to 2008, he's making money hand over fist, was starting to get super wealthy selling these timeshares and giving out timeshare loans to basically anybody who wanted them. It was the subprime mortgage time, right? So he got really wealthy giving out these subprime loans, mortgages for these timeshares. And he started to build what he wanted to be the biggest house in America, and is in Florida and modeled after Versailles in France. And this is his wife. And this fella sent this following letter to his employees, and which I'm going to read to illustrate appeal to force. As most of you know, our company, Westgate Resorts, has continued to succeed in spite of a very dismal economy. There's no question that the economy has changed for the worse, and we've not seen any improvement over the past 4 years. In spite of all the challenges we've faced, the good news is this: the economy doesn't currently pose a threat to your job. What does threaten your job, however, is another 4 years of the same presidential administration. Of course, as your employer, I can't tell you whom to vote for, and I certainly wouldn't interfere with your right to vote for whomever you choose. In fact, I encourage you to vote for whomever you think will serve your interests the best. So where am I going with all of this? It's quite simple. If any new taxes are levied on me or my company, as our current president plans, I will have no choice but to reduce the size of this company. Rather than grow this company, I will be forced to cut back. This means fewer jobs, less benefits, and certainly less opportunity for everyone. You see, I can no longer support a system that penalizes the productive and gives to the unproductive. My motivation to work and to provide jobs will be destroyed, and with it, so will your opportunities. And if that happens, you can find me in the Caribbean, sitting on the beach under a palm tree, retired, and with no employees to worry about. Classic appeal to force. He's basically, the conclusion of this is, you all better not vote for Obama again. Well, why not? If you do, you're going to lose your job. He got into a lot of trouble for this, by the way. This is a classic World War II propaganda poster, essentially. It's asking you to buy war bonds. A lot of this image was cut off. Sorry about that. But it's the poster is saying, buy war bonds, buy World War II bonds, invest in the war effort. Why? If you don't, then the demon hand Nazis, and there's supposed to be one for the Japanese coming in this way, are coming after your pristine white wife and baby, right? Scare tactics. Or same here. When you pirate MP3s, you're downloading communism. That's supposed to be kind of funny because it's modern. It's kind of mocking the old way of doing things, those propaganda posters, but still it makes its point, right? If you're ushering the sharing of files, you're ushering in communism. And look at the demon, right? Make our homes and streets safe. Vote Republican. So you need to vote Republican. That's the conclusion. If you don't, look what's going to happen. Or stop climate change before it changes you. Look, all fair. I understand these are public service announcements. So they only have one quick opportunity to make their point. So the imagery and this sort of, boom, have an impact. It matters. You need to do it quickly. It's supposed to be scary and dissettling. But from a logical perspective, we're not going to turn into fish people. Scare tactics. Appeal to force. Next, appeal to pity. Appeal to your merciful heart. So that's a specific kind of emotional plea that relies solely on a sense of pity for support. And a legitimate argument, it's not going to have to rely solely on pity to support its conclusion. Pity alone is irrelevant to whatever conclusion you're trying to convince people of. So this fallacy exploits the natural tendency many of us have to be swayed by the plight of others, which is, to me, it's a good thing, right? But often we use this to force conclusions on people without any other premises in support of the conclusion, and that's when the fallacy is committed. So examples. You can't give me an F on the exam. Well, why? That's what you earned. If you do, my parents will be so upset that they'll have to be hospitalized. Sad, I understand, but irrelevant to the conclusion. Or, officer, you just can't give me that ticket. Why? I'm flunking out of school and I'm about to get evicted and my boyfriend just left me for my best friend. Again, sad, but irrelevant to the conclusion of whether or not you deserve the ticket. And this puppy was starving and cold on the streets of Tijuana just a few days ago. Surely you should adopt him immediately. Again, sad, but not a reason to adopt a dog solely. You don't adopt a dog solely based on pity. That's the same with all of these textbook examples. So here's a clip from a 1980 newspaper, apparently. Dear sir, as a mother of 9 children, I would like to speak out on the draft everyone is talking about. I am one that is very much against it. I lost a husband in Korea, and if they draft from age 18 to 26, I stand to lose 4 sons and 1 daughter. And as a mother in poor health, I don't think I could take that. Why can't Carter leave well enough alone and try to find some of our boys still missing or being held someplace? A letter to the editor in a newspaper, apparently. Right, so look, all of this is super sad. This woman is trying to argue that we should not reinstate the draft. Why? She doesn't offer any relevant premises. It's just all appeals to pity. Look, I understand, again, these are sad things. It's okay that they're sad, but from a logical perspective, the reasons she offers for not reinstating the draft are irrelevant. Let's get rid of that one and this one. I think the point's made. Okay, next up, appeal to the people. Argumentum ad populum. So that's the use of our desire to belong in a group, either general or specific, in order to argue for a conclusion. This one has a lot of sway on us, everybody. So it exploits our psychological need to identify with others. And this is putting it mildly. Sometimes it's known as bandwagoning, right? So here's some examples. Oh, you just have to get the new Cardi B album. Well, why? Everyone's listening to it and it's at the top of the Billboard 100 or whatever, right? Everybody's downloading it. These are that's irrelevant to why anyone should buy an album, right? You're just trying to exploit the fact that, well, what's wrong with me if I don't have it, right? Or the few, the proud, the Marines, right? The unstated conclusion is here. You ought to join the Marines. Why? Because we're the few and the proud. Join the select group. Don't you want to be part of this select group as opposed to a larger group? That's known as the vanity appeal, but it's an appeal to the people nonetheless. Or living in Acme condominiums isn't for everyone, only for people of the most discriminating taste. Buy yours today. So buy this condominium. Why? Because only people with really sophisticated taste bother to live there. Don't you want to be one of them? So that's kind of like snobbery, right? Still, an appeal to the people has a lot of force on us, everybody, in all facets of our life. It's just everybody's doing it. The vicious circle. Who's going to be the first to break away? This is a really old English cartoon. And I like to include these just because it shows how far back the use of these fallacies in advertising go. Smoking is believing. During the summer season of extra smoking, begin enjoying the cigarette of extra smokes. Everyone can afford the coolness. It's right, appealing to everybody. Everybody likes this stuff. Or McDonald's, over 99 billion served. That's supposed to have psychological impact on you. How could all these people be wrong? And what's wrong with me if I'm not going there? Or Wheaties, it's the breakfast of champions. So don't, buy Wheaties. Don't you want to be a champion too? Join this club of champions. Or Dunkin' Donuts, America runs on Dunkin'. That's a real appeal to the people. America runs on Dunkin'. Buy them. Join the club. Or 120 million iOS devices shipped. So they tell you this because it makes you think, God, I'm not in on the action. Right? There's a reason that they're not just pitching what makes the device good. They're saying, look how many people have already done it. Or again, Cheerios, America's favorite cereal. Follow Buzz as he travels the country, right? Or, gosh, the Fire Festival. The appeal of if any of you have seen that documentary, and I'm going to show it in my in-person classes, but either the one on Hulu or wherever the other one is, Netflix maybe. The Fire Festival was a gigantic modern example of the appeal to the people fallacy and foible and bumble. I don't even know what I'm trying to say there, but what a disaster, right? That's everybody falling for the appeal to the people fallacy. Okay, appeal to tradition. This fallacy occurs when premises describe the fact that a product, belief, or practice was common in the past, and that the conclusion is that the product, belief, or practice would be appropriate in the present. Right? So this tactic, it often appeals to our sense of nostalgia and how things used to be, which really hits us where we live sometimes. So here's some examples. Of course you're going to become a doctor. For 5 generations, the men in our family went to Stanford and became doctors. Right? That's no reason why this particular person ought to become a doctor. You're just saying, look, keep up the tradition. That has a lot of force on us, right? So emotionally effective? Yes. Logically effective? No. It's an appeal to tradition. Or Catholic priests should never be allowed to marry. Well, why? Well, they've never been allowed to marry before and things have worked out just fine. It's a matter of tradition. Right? So in order to justify this conclusion, you're saying it's not part of the tradition. Or marriage has traditionally been between a man and a woman, therefore gay marriage should not be allowed, right? Why shouldn't we allow it? Because it's always been this way. Again, all known as appeals to tradition, fallacies of relevance. So images. Ancient grain. So I don't know if you've ever noticed this in cereal aisles or bread aisles, right? But they like to sell these kind of things by saying, look, ancient grain. So we're not that new kind, or the relatively new kind of cereal with a lot of refined sugar and colorings and stuff. Well, these are ancient grains. We're going back to tradition, right? So buy this one. Or this Coca-Cola Classic never goes out of style. So buy Coca-Cola because it's part of the tradition. Or again, just in the word, America's oldest family tradition, Yangling Lager. I think that's an East Coast thing. So buy this beer. It's part of our tradition. Or every child deserves a mom and a dad. So this is anti same-sex marriage. Why? Because this is the tradition. Good. Okay, so next up, argument against the person. So this occurs when a claim's rejected based on criticism of the person's character or circumstances rather than relevant criticism of the claim itself. And this includes the one known as tu quoque. This tactic exploits our tendency to go after people rather than go after arguments. And that's sometimes known as poisoning the well, because the idea is that if you have a well full of water, right? That's an old phrase, but if you have a well full of water, right, that's clean and people are pulling out of it to drink, if you go in and poison the well, then anything that comes out of the well is going to be poisonous, right? So the idea is that if somebody makes an argument and you poison their character, anything that comes from them is poisonous as well. But the fallacy is known as argument against the person. So examples. Jones has argued for a ban on government-sanctioned prayer at school events. But he's a rabid atheist without any discernible morals. Anything he has to say should be rejected outright. So you gotta imagine that this person, Jones, argued for a ban on government-sanctioned prayer at schools. And instead of going against his argument, you just say, he's a terrible atheist, don't listen to him, against the person. Or Mary says that we should oppose abortion. But you can't take her seriously. Her father's the pastor of a fundamentalist church. So again, imagine that she puts forth an argument against abortion, and then somebody says, you can't listen to her. Her father's, of course she's going to say that. Her father's the pastor of a fundamentalist church. So that's attacking the person's circumstances, right? Circumstantially, she happens to be the daughter of a pastor, so you shouldn't listen to her. Or these Hollywood liberals tell us that we should do everything we can to help the environment, but you gotta ignore them. Have you ever seen the gas guzzling machines they have parked in front of their houses? And that's known as 2K. So imagine that whatever Hollywood liberals, however you define that, are putting up arguments that you've got to go green, right? And then somebody comes along and says, just ignore them. Have you ever seen all the gas, the cars they drive and their jets and their carbon footprints? Don't listen to them. Well, that's it. Basically 2K means you too, or you also. So it's essentially calling somebody out as being a hypocrite. Again, very effective, but you're not taking on the argument. You're just saying ignore them because they're hypocrites. Logically, that is a fallacy. So, political ads make super use of this. This is the stuff of politics today, everybody, is the smear campaign, right? Smear campaigns are arguments against the person. This is a good example. Another one, Rick Santorum, a serial hypocrite who can't be trusted. It doesn't say anything about Rick Santorum. It just says he smears his character against the person. Another one, right? Strawman, next fallacy. So this fallacy occurs when someone's written or spoken words are taken out of context and misrepresented, and it purposefully distorts the original argument to create a new and weak argument that can be easily refuted or knocked down, right? Hence the name straw man. So you got to imagine you've got two people arguing, right? Imagine that person A lays down a decent argument on behalf of whatever the case might be. And the other person, instead of taking on the argument in a logical fashion, you just grab a little piece of it and then whip it into a frenzy and make it look ridiculous and make it sound, you distort it. And then you attack that distortion that you just whipped up instead of the original argument. So the idea is that you're building a straw man out of the argument, because a straw man is easier to knock down than a real one. Right? So you're refuting an argument that you effectively built up. So here's some examples. That candidate is against the new law that mandates teaching intelligent design alongside the theory of evolution. It should be obvious to anyone that she really wants to just eliminate religious belief altogether. We can't take this candidate seriously. So imagine that there's a candidate who says, hey, I'm against this new law that says we've got to teach intelligent design along with evolution. And that candidate lays out an argument for that. And the opponent says, this person just wants to get rid of religious belief altogether, not just in schools, but period. And then we can't take this person seriously. So I know it can sound a little bit like against the person, but what you have is someone taking out one piece and distorting it here and then trying to knock down the straw man argument that they just built up here. Or Romney has said that he wants to stop government funding of PBS. What he really wants is to crush all of the children's programming beloved by so many people. He hates Big Bird. What did Big Bird ever do to him? We can't have a man like this as our next president. This one really happened during the Obama's re-election campaign. Everybody does this in politics, no matter who you like or don't like, right? So this happened when Romney on his campaign said, he wanted to stop funding public broadcasting. And he gave an argument for it. Like it or don't, he gave an argument. Right? And Obama came in and heard that and said, well, Sesame Street's on PBS. So what he really wants to do is crush Sesame Street. He hates Big Bird. What did Big Bird ever do to him? Look this up if you want. There's video of this. But this was a classic straw manning. So here, there's not much in the way of video because this really has to be found in audio or in writing, but it just, addresses the fallacy. Step 1, assemble straw man using the distortion, misrepresentation, and simplification tools enclosed. Step 2, knock straw man down. Step 3, claim victory. Hours of fun guaranteed. Or here's one. This is Rand Paul, who's a Kentucky senator, right? And they're coming after your donuts, the Kentucky Republican said, referring to the FDA's decision to ban trans fats. Paul's remarks came during a speech at the Charleston meeting in South Carolina Monday night. He went on to argue, the FDA has banned unilaterally. Some unelected bureaucrat has banned trans fats. If we're going to have a nanny state and everybody's got to eat the right thing and you can't eat a donut, maybe we ought to just enforce it on the government workers first. So this is a straw man because what happened was the Food and Drug Administration determined that trans fats that are used in a lot of cheap, fatty foods, like donuts, like Little Debbie's snack cakes and Hostess and all that kind of crap, the FDA decided to ban them because they came to a conclusion that they were terribly unhealthy for us. Not ban fats, period, but this specific kind, right? And then Rand Paul took that and ran with it. He said, somebody is coming after your donuts. And if we're going to have a nanny state and you can't eat a donut, right? That's not what the FDA was saying. They're saying, go ahead, make it. We're not trying to make a nanny state. We're not trying to say you can't eat donuts. They just can't use these things to make them anymore. But here he effectively strawmanned the FDA's position, right? Okay, next up. We're almost through. Red herring, similar to straw man. This fallacy occurs when someone introduces irrelevant matters into an opponent's argument in order to throw you off the scent. It's a distraction technique, right? The attention of the reader or listener is diverted by a change in subject matter. So straw man, it seems like straw man tries to do that, but think back to the cartoon we looked at. That's how a straw man goes down. A red herring tries to take you off the scent, lead you off the scent. And the idea behind the red herring is some people will say that it was named this fallacy because, hundreds of years ago, they used to feed prisoners this cheap fish known as herring, and the prisoners would save it up, and it would like in bags, and it would rot and turn a kind of pinkish reddish color, and then they would use it on prison breaks to try to distract the dogs, right? The search dogs. So they'd break out of prison with this stinky stuff, and they'd throw it one way and they'd run the other, and the idea was that the dogs would get distracted. So here's some examples. Every woman should have a right to abortion on demand, that being the conclusion, right? And then the reasons. These anti-abortion activists block the entrances to abortion clinics. They threaten abortion doctors and intimidate anyone who wants to terminate an unwanted pregnancy, right? This is supposed to be the topic, right? You're arguing for abortion on demand. Well, why should we have abortion on demand? And then here's the diversion tactics. Look what these anti-abortion activists do, right? So you're going, look over here. And then it kind of tricks people into believing the conclusion. Or, American software companies complain that China is pirating their software. So this is the subject matter, right? But we must realize that China is only beginning to enter the computer age. Although a few Chinese industries are computerized, the majority are not. There are a million college industries that have never even seen a computer. We expect that China will modernize, but we must be patient. So the idea here is this. Imagine that an American software company puts down an argument saying, therefore, we've got to stop this. We've got to stop China from pirating our software for this, that, and the other reason. And then somebody else, perhaps somebody from China or somebody who has interest in this piracy, says, hey, look over here. You got to realize that China's only beginning to enter the computer age, blah, 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 blah. Not, all of this is leading you off the trail of the original argument. Okay? So again, you can't really see this in like advertisements so much. So I did the best I could here. It's my contention that the flying spaghetti monster does exist. Well, what evidence do you have to support such an assertion? Oh, there's plenty of evidence. It's all around us. Besides, look at how I'm standing on one leg. I mean, this is just ridiculous. But look over here, look over here. Don't look at what we're really talking about. It's a distraction technique, trying to throw you off the scent. Okay, that's it. Whew. So topics covered are fallacies in general, that was 3.1, and fallacies of relevance, that was 3.2. And those fallacies were appeal to force, pity, appeal to people, tradition, against the person, strawman, and red herring.